we'd like to do is really let's start at the beginning. If you could kind of share with us where you were born and how you got into the military, if you had siblings or your father was in the military.
Well, I was born in Clinton, Iowa, back in 1975, a while ago. I have two siblings, a brother and a sister. I am the oldest, though. And as far as military in the family, I had my father was in the Navy before I was born, so I never got to see, him in uniform or anything. But I had a lot of my uncles that were also served. They were kind of split between the Navy and the Army. I had a couple of uncles that were in the Army. Growing up, I always wanted to, G.I. Joe was one of my favorite cartoons, so knowing is half the battle. But I always wanted to be in the Army, and with that, I always wanted to do infantry. To me, that's what the Army was about. But I joined the reserves when I was 17.
Okay.
I had to get my parents' permission.
I was going to say, you're about a year shy there.
And actually was on the split op program back then, which...
Can you explain a little bit what that was?
The split op is you join when you're 17 and you actually go to training between your junior and senior year for basic. And then once you graduate after your senior year, you go back and finish your MOS training, your AIT. I definitely would not recommend it to anybody because it's hard, going through that basic and then having a year where you're just going to your drill, to your unit, because I was in the reserves, and then having to go back into the training, especially if you're infantry, because, basic and AIT are very similar at that point. So, I
was thinking when you were talking about that, I was thinking about the dual enrollment program where they can go and they can actually start to earn college credits. This is a similar thing that the military has.
Yeah. And then my first unit was 1st the 410th Arctic Light Infantry, stationed in Davenport, Iowa, and they ended up being deactivated. It was during the early 90s. I went to basic in 92, and then I went to my MOS training in 93. And they ended up being deactivated about a year later. I was placed in the inactive ready reserve, got a call up to join a different unit, went there for a couple of drills, and they ended up being deactivated. It was during a time period in the military where right after Desert Storm, they were taking a lot of the combat arms out of the reserves and keeping that in the active, and they were doing a lot more of the support units in the reserves so that they could take more time to mobilize and then get over there and support the combat troops. So, me being infantry, I spent a lot of time in the inactive ready reserve. I actually spent another unit I ended up being a part of was an instructional infantry unit. I actually made E4 there, was a corporal, and which is a funny story because then when that unit got deactivated, I eventually got my honorable discharge from the reserves after spending a majority. I think I actually was in a unit 2.5, maybe 3 years out of my whole 8-year obligation in the reserves. And the rest of that time was spent in the inactive ready reserve. So, I go and I get married, and I have 2 stepsons and a daughter on the way, and did not have any, college education to speak of at the time, and was working a job that, for the time paid well, but didn't have any benefits. So decided I needed to do something for my family, and, lo and behold, I got my honorable discharge from the reserves, and I'm like, well, I can go active in the military. And I took that down and decided to go active in the military, which was my main motivation, was to build a foundation for my family. My intention when I signed up, of course, I stayed infantry because I wanted to be infantry. That's what I want to do.
Even with family.
Oh yeah, even with family. Yeah, I just couldn't picture myself doing anything different in the Army. Is that I knew that I could get into college. While you're on active duty, they have a tuition assistance program.
Yes, they do.
And then I knew I had the GI Bill when I got out, and so that was my intention. And being infantry, I didn't realize how difficult it was, how often we spent out in the field to actually take college classes. I was able to take a couple, but my initial 3-year enlistment, I had only taken like 2 college courses.
I know our son, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, he did a 5-year stint in active, and now he's in reserves. But he shared a similar thing. Yes, you have that benefit, but the opportunity to actually do it, can be
It's-
challenging
yeah.
anyway. So continue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and it is. It's something that you really got to have the drive to want the college. You can make it work. I mean, even deployed, I knew guys that were doing college classes online from being deployed. But it is something that is a major sacrifice because you got to decide between sleep and doing your homework, especially on deployments. But so that was my intention, and I did that first 3 years, and didn't have any college, so decided to re-enlist. And kind of from there, I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to stay in. My first 3 years I spent in Hawaii, which I mean would be nice for anybody.
Sure.
And I was with Bravo Company 227 Infantry.
And so what kinds of things were you doing there?
Training. We did a lot of, at that time, I actually joined before active duty before 9/11, and was over there. We did a lot of training. Back in that time, the military was set up to where you had like 3 phases. One phase, you were ready, your battalion's ready to be deployed. It's deployable. The next one is you're getting ready to be deployed. And then the third one is like you're doing like details and other things. And I can remember specifically at one point in time being on the funeral detail and being able to go to the Hawaii Punch Bowl, which is a really neat place to be. If you ever go to Hawaii, check out the Punch Bowl because it's a really, really solemn place. But I also did a
Which island is that on?
Oahu.
Okay.
Oahu, yeah. That's I was at Schofield Barracks in Oahu, and really enjoyed it. Did a lot of things while I was there, military career wise. Became an NCO, made E5, was a sergeant, and got to do some air assault school. That was fun. I am afraid of heights, and it's one of those things where I like to
That's
do things.
Good with air assault.
It's one of those things.
Good matches.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I like to do things to challenge myself and push myself, and the air assault definitely pushed. Rappelling out of a helicopter is pretty interesting when you're afraid of heights.
Yeah.
But especially me being a bigger guy too. I was over 200 pounds, so the rappelling out. It's a little bit harder to stop when you're a bigger guy with your combat gear on. So that was a little interesting.
Yeah, I remember that. Our son told me too. He did the air assault, and
Yeah.
you can get upside down and not
Oh, yeah.
be able to get right side up
Yeah,
again.
especially out of the helicopters, because when you're rappelling off of the towers when you're practicing, you get into your L formation and you lower yourself down. You give yourself more slack. But when you're in the helicopter, if you give yourself the same amount of slack, you'll end up upside down underneath the helicopter. It's a lot less slack that you want to give when you're actually in the helicopter rappelling out. And and it's one of those things where they tell you can do a double wrap if you're a bigger guy because you weigh more, which will help you brake. But then they also make fun of you if you do it. So, of course, me being who I was, I never did that. Yeah, so I never actually came to a stop as I was rappelling down. It was just kind of like a controlled fall. Yeah. But a lot of fun. But I also got to do some work with the division shooting team, the 25th Infantry Division shooting team. They sent us to the Marine Corps base down there on Kaneohe. And went through a primary marksmanship instructor course, which is the guys that train their guys how to shoot. And it was pretty interesting. We were down there for 3 weeks. The first week is set up is learning all the range safety and the proper procedures, and then you do a week of training with the rifle, and then a week of training with the pistol before you qualify. So that was fun. They have a different style of shooting in the Marine Corps than the Army does.
Well, that's interesting.
The Army does transition targets from 50 to 300 meters, and so they're like pop-up targets at different ranges. So you're shooting constantly at different ranges, and they're only up for a few seconds, and then they go back down. The Marine Corps does a known distance shooting. So when they go out to the range, they're shooting at specified ranges out to 500 meters. And they do a lot more of actually adjusting their sights for the distance that they know they're shooting at. Whereas the Army, we kind of figure out, at 50 meters where the round's going to be, and at 300 meters, and then so your 200-meter target, you want to aim a little low because it's got like a slight arc to it. So,
Gee, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
No, sparked interest in the difference between those two styles.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
or maybe it's catered for different warfare situations or something.
Well, I never looked into it that far. I just was enjoying what I was doing.
Yeah.
It helped me to be a better marksman. And the whole idea was is we were gonna, once we came back, we were gonna give all our ideas to the division shooting team, because they were actually trying to come up with a new platform for qualification in the 25th Infantry Division, combining the two, doing the transition still, but then also doing known distance. Because like I said, with the Marine Corps, they actually will adjust their sights depending on what range they're shooting at. So if they're shooting at 500 meters, they'll adjust their sights for it. Whereas in the Army, like I said, we set ours at a 0 and then just shoot from there. But I do remember coming back and, the point target is 350 meters for an M4, and area targets, or 300 meters, the area target's 550 meters. And I was hitting targets at 800 meters, quite regularly, which surprised my platoon sergeant quite a bit. So it really improved my shooting technique. We gave a lot of good ideas to the 25th Infantry Division shooting team. And then I was actually supposed to go to the Marine Corps sniper school there in Hawaii. And at that point in time, I only had about 6 months left. And they told me I didn't have enough time left on the island. I'd have to re-enlist and stay on the island in order to be able.
Bad.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You do get kind of cabin fever, I call it. Being
I've
on
heard others
one.
say that. Yeah.
So I was actually, and I'm also, being from the Midwest, I like having 4 seasons. Hawaii, it's a 10-degree difference between winter and summer. It's either 85 degrees in summer or 75 in the winter. So I was kind of missing fall and winter. But I really enjoyed my time in Hawaii. I did a lot of good things. I would say that infantry, I've done several different phases of infantry. I've done mechanized infantry, and I've got to say that the light infantry was more what I envisioned it
what's
being.
sort of the difference between those two?
Well, light infantry, you don't have as many assets as you do mechanized. Mechanized infantry has like the Bradley fighting vehicles, and so they have like a 25 millimeter cannon. They're armored, so you drive around. They'll transport you there, and it's more about the Bradley fighting vehicle than it is about the infantry guys when it comes to the training, because that's where all the money's at. Whereas in light infantry, it's you and the guy next to you, and that's all you have out there. We do a lot more, in light infantry, you did a lot more, physical stuff. Like we did a lot longer road marches with more weight than what I did when I was in mech. I remember going to my mechanized unit. I was with 3-7, Bravo Company 3-7. I went to Fort Stewart, Georgia, 3rd Infantry Division. And I remember they told me the first morning to get ready to do a road march and that to pack 45 pounds. And I was like, okay, well, if we're doing 45 pounds, usually we would do 12 miles or more in light infantry, and it ended up being like a 5-mile road march, and I was like amazed at how easy it was. I was just like, I'm used to doing like 12 miles with this kind of weight. If we were doing a 5-mile road march, we would use 60 or 70 pounds to make it more realistic. But, it's just a different concept. When you're in the mechanized infantry, like I said, you've got the Bradley there as support. And it carries around your rucksack for you, so you don't have to carry your rucksack as often, and it's got its benefits. But I will say I spent Iraq in the 3rd Infantry Division, went over to Iraq mechanized, and I can tell you that it has its drawbacks having a Bradley fighting vehicle too, because when it's 130 degrees out and you're inside of an armored vehicle, it's a little bit warmer inside there.
Well, now, before we get to Iraq, you were like 3 years in Hawaii.
Yeah, 3 years in Hawaii.
And then where did you go after that?
I went to Fort Stewart, Georgia.
Okay.
Actually, I went to Bravo Company 3-7, which is a cotton baler unit. I'm big on the history stuff with the units, and the cotton baler unit was the unit that fought in the War of 1812 with Jackson when they ambushed the British in New Orleans. So that was one of the battalions. And when I first got there, I was in that unit. They had just got back from their first tour in Iraq. They were there for the initial invasion. And so I came in as an E5 team leader. And I mean, they were still on leave when I got there. And so now I'm put in charge of a team that these guys had already been to war, and here I was, this green guy that, you know, I was light infantry, but I'd never even, you know, been to
They
combat.
seem to do
so,
that.
Yeah. So I would say that in my military career, that was probably my largest, my biggest leadership challenges, is being this green guy that's never been to combat, but being put in charge of guys that, you know, I mean, in my actual squad.
And I sometimes wonder why they do that, or they.
You just have to integrate. Yeah. You know, because people are leaving, and
Sure.
you know, when they came back. But you know, my squad was actually ambushed while they were in Iraq. You know, before I was with them. So these guys came back, and they had actually lost 2 people in the squad, and half the squad had Purple Hearts.
And how many are in a squad?
It varies. Usually around 9 guys.
Okay.
You'd have 9 to 12 depending on you know how full up you are. But so you know, here I am in charge of these guys, and we're back in garrison, and so I'm having to tell them to clean their barracks room when you know they just came back from war and lost their friends, and you know, so it was a good leadership challenge. But you know, I got through it. You know, did what I had to do, and was with 3-7 for a short time, and that was actually when the Army was changing to the combined arms battalions. And ours was one of the first units to transition. So they took Bravo Company 3-7 and Alpha Company 3-7 and reflagged us underneath of Bravo Company 464, which was actually an armor battalion. And what they did was, so there was 2 infantry companies, there was 2 tank companies, and then there was an engineering company in the same battalion. So that way you kind of basically you have brigade assets within a battalion. So that way that gives you more flexibility, because with deploying to Iraq at that point in time, you know, they wouldn't need an entire brigade somewhere. They would just need a battalion. So that gave a battalion the flexibility to have the same assets as a brigade.
And tell me briefly the difference in numbers with a battalion and a brigade. Or I'm sure it varies, but
yeah, that was above my pay grade. I know a battalion usually has. I know my battalion in Hawaii had 939 guys. Because
I'm just trying to get an idea of numbers.
Where you know a brigade, you know, is like 3,000 to 5,000. So depending on you know how full up they are on their personnel, but so it really gives the assets though, because like you know, not only did you have the 2 infantry, the 2 tank companies and engineer company, and then of course you got your HHC, but you also had brigade level assets being broken up, like your field artillery and stuff like that, and your support, which gave, like I said, gave you more flexibility of being deployed. They didn't have to deploy an entire brigade to one sector. They could split you up and move you out. I will say that the transition at the time was a little difficult for us, because being infantry guys, you know, we have a lot of pride in what we do, and we were reflagged underneath of an armored flag. So we were in an armored battalion, and there were some hard feelings there in the beginning, but we ended up working working well together, and you know, it was just, you know, fun, you know, kind of like jock type stuff, you know, giving each other a hard time, but you know, and that's just like, you know, we did a lot of work to get our guys, because you know, with our mission when we did go to Iraq, we had to teach like the tank companies how to, you know, enter and clear rooms and set up cordons and stuff like that. You know, so I was a part of a team that actually went over and trained them on doing reflexive fire, which is, you know, you use it for your MOUT type fire, your short distance shooting from, you know, like clearing a room, going into a room and clearing it. And that kind of helped us integrate better with them when we got to actually go work with them, meet them. And
so were you then deployed to Iraq from Georgia?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where are we now, time-wise, year-wise?
2005 to 2006 is when I deployed to Iraq.
Okay.
So, and you know, we got over to Iraq, and my my company actually was separated from the rest of the battalion, and we were sent up to FOB Independence, which was a little place up by ourselves. We had us and one other American company, and then we had Iraqi National Guard troops that they were training. The other company was working on training the Iraqi National Guard guys. We were doing actual combat patrols. They don't like calling them presence patrols, but in all honesty, that's what it was until you made contact. It was just kind of putting a show out there so that the enemy knew we were out there continually. We took over a sector with from a unit that 90% of the unit had Purple Hearts leaving their tour. We were up on Haifa Street, which was at the time one of the most dangerous streets in Iraq at that point in time. We went in there. It was interesting. I
So
remember.
what did your days? How were your days? How did that go there?
Well, when we first got out there at Five Independence, like we didn't have a lot of assets like food, like we actually ate MREs most of the time, and then like Wednesdays they would bring in Mermites with like cold cuts, so like we would have like cold cut sandwiches, and that was like the highlight of our week was getting the cold cut sandwiches instead of having to eat MREs. So we didn't have a lot of resources.
And the
out there.
MREs are those little
Meal
condensed,
ready to eat,
right?
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and they're getting a lot better nowadays than what they used to be.
Yeah, Doug told me. He said some of them were actually
some
pretty
of 'em-
good.
Yeah, some of
They
nowadays
trade 'em around.
Yeah, nowadays some of them are pretty good.
Yeah.
And like I said, our focus was to do all American patrols out in our sector. I remember the first night we had a rocket attack, and it was like within our first week of being on the FOB and an incoming rocket, and I just remember everybody's reaction because everybody ran and took cover and everything, and of course by the end of it it wasn't as big a deal. It didn't hit our facility; it actually hit just outside of our facility. I actually did a patrol the next morning to go out and find out because it happened at night. The next morning to find out where the impact was, so that we could do an evaluation to see what direction it came from.
So are you guys living in tents, or were you in buildings?
No, we lived in a building. It was a solid building. I lived in a room. There was 5 of us in a room about the size of this here, living in bunk beds. And then eventually our mission changed 3 months in, and they turned over our sector to the Iraqi National Guard because it had settled down so much. One of the things that we did when we went out there is, they getting trained up to go out there. They were talking about how, the terrorists were hiring kids, giving kids money to throw grenades at American troops and stuff like that. And so when we got out there and got into sector, a lot of what we were doing was making sure that we didn't respond overly aggressive to certain things, and then also trying to just build a relationship with the community, because a lot of it, they're not happy that we're there. Even if they're happy that Saddam Hussein was gone at the time, they're not happy that we're there in their neighborhoods. I can imagine being the same way here. I wouldn't be happy if we had somebody come in and I had to watch what I was doing around them. So
was it a kind of challenge being in a leadership situation in combat situation like that?
It was. I think the biggest thing about being in a leadership position, especially with that, especially when something happens, we'd have an improvised explosive device explode and wound a few people, and then you got to go out that next day or even later that day and do another patrol, and you got a lot of younger guys that are looking at you, and if you're scared and show that you're scared, then that feeds their fear. And so you really got to hide your emotions when you're going out there and just act like you're confident, even if inside you're not feeling it. You have to act like you're confident so that they feel confident in what you guys are doing. And that was something that I did without even realizing at the time. But I remember doing a patrol after we got hit. My next patrol, we were going out, and I remember passing a trash pile and didn't realize it, but I was actually holding my breath, waiting for something to explode. And but you can't show that to your guys because, like I said, they feed off of what you're doing. So you have to remain confident even if you're not. In decisions that you make while in combat, you have to be confident that it's the right thing to do, even if you're not 100% sure it's the right thing to do. Because, like I said, the success of it and them wanting to do it and being able to do it is feeding off the confidence that they have in you as a leader. So. But our mission changed several times while we were in Iraq. We went from, patrolling Haifa Street that we actually moved down into FOB Prosperity, which had a really nice dining facility compared to what we had before. I mean, they had really nice dining facility. It was one of the top 2 in Iraq. according to soldiers talking about him, it was one of the top two. But and it was a facility that actually had the like the Connex rooms for people that were living in them. They're almost like 2-man apartments. Well, because we came in late, there were no more of those available. So again, we got stuck in a little like servant building because it was one of Saddam's palaces. We got put in this little, and I was in a room that we had 9 guys living in a room, again, about the size of this room here, living on bunk beds. And our mission changed. We actually took over doing American patrols in the Karata Peninsula. And a lot of what we did there was, we did presence patrols again, or combat patrols, but a lot of what we also did was spent time responding to incidences like V-bids that had exploded, but most of the time it was the Iraqis fighting the Iraqis. A V-bid will blow up in a
what is
public
that?
area.
Tell me what that is.
A V-bid is a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. So like somebody would drive a car with explosives, drive into a public area, and then detonate it and kill themselves, but then usually injure or kill a lot of other people. So we spent a lot of time responding to those. We did get hit a couple of times. Luckily, we didn't lose anybody as far as being killed.
That was my next question. I was going to say, did you have to
we had some
deal
guys,
with that? We
had some guys that were injured, and one was injured severely enough that he had to be medevaced out. But he's still around today. I still talk to him. He's friends with me on Facebook.
Good.
Still talk to him.
What happened to him?
We actually went out to do a mosque assessment, and it was our first time doing a mosque assessment. And when we went out in the morning. And a mosque assessment, basically, you just go out and record and listen to the message that the mosque is putting out, and then you go back and you evaluate whether it's anti-American or anything along those lines, or whether they're leaning towards being pro-American. So we had gone out there, and we got there in the morning, and they told us that they weren't going to do their religious stuff until 1300 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And the leadership, not me, but the leadership at that point decided that we were going to come back at 1 o'clock to do the mosque assessment. And that ended up being a bad idea. So we let the imam know that we were coming back, and we came back, and I remember we had set up, we had 3 Bradleys with us. One was at the end of the street, one was at a further, and there was actually a T intersection, and another one was sitting at that T intersection. But my squad, we dismounted and we went down that T road, and the other 2 squads dismounted and they were along the longer road, and there was a brick wall behind them. And from the main road, a car came flying in, and the kid that was injured badly was on that corner. And the car actually came in between him and the Bradley and detonated. And I mean, he was literally 5 feet from the explosion when it happened, and it was a big explosion. I remember, when we were responding to it, we were running back down that way to try to set up security, and I remember seeing like huge chunks of concrete and stuff flying past me as I was running down. I mean, it was a huge explosion, and we get down there and assess the situation. He, applying buddy aid to him, and they found out later that the explosion was so big that the actual person that was in the vehicle that detonated, they found his torso on top of a 3-story building next to where the explosion happened. So it had blown him out of the car and onto the top of the 3-story building. But what saved the kid that got injured was that the way they'd set up the explosives, it blew up. If it had blown out, it would have killed him. But of course, he has issues still, traumatic brain injury from being so close to the explosion. But he made it home still, so that was a good thing. But a few other people were injured, but nobody nearly as severe as him. So, but there was a few other times when we went out. We were actually going to a school, and another instance, we were actually escorting school buses to go to this event to, try and do things with the community. And somebody pulled up alongside of our vehicle and detonated a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device there too. Nobody was severely injured. We had one guy, well, I guess that depends on what you consider severe. We had one guy who lost an eye, and then another guy got some shrapnel wounds in his arm, and a couple guys had concussions, but that was the extent of it. And then after that, our mission changed again. So for the third time in our year deployment, our mission changed. We were 6 months in.
I sometimes wonder if it's good or bad. I mean, you kind of get used to one scenario, but these...
Yeah, because you do. You kind of learn what you're doing.
But this whole thing of navigating in situations where these explosives might go off, I'm sitting here, and of course it's a wussy, but I'm thinking this... to be on edge like that, I don't know, that's very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, and that was like, because our next mission was actually, we took over for another American unit that was having issues as a MIT team, which was, we were training the Iraqi army. We ended up training the 1st Battalion, 6th Brigade Iraqi army. We took over, and we ended up splitting up, like our platoon split up into 2 teams. So like my platoon sergeant was in charge of one team, and our platoon leader was in charge of the other. I was on the team with my platoon sergeant, and we were actually training a company. And like when we first took over, they had a lot of issues with accountability of their personnel. Like guys would, you do roll call in the morning, they'd be like, oh, he's on vacation or he's on leave, and like these guys are supposed to be here. Once we got all that worked out, then we worked on getting them their equipment, because equipment they'd been issued before came up missing. But we were able to actually finally get them to where they needed to be, and we actually got into where we were training them to do combat missions.
And this is the
Iraqi
Iraqi
army.
This is the Iraqi troops. Okay.
Yeah. So we would go out, like I would do patrols with me and 2 other guys on the ground, with up to 125 Iraqi soldiers, and we patrol our sectors. Again, we got hit a few times. Those guys, some of those guys are really brave guys and really care about their country. We had a few of them that were injured or even killed, especially like around times when they were voting. Like there was always threats against their voting, where they were going to cast their votes. And their voting stations, and so our guys would actually set up security around the voting stations to help protect them, to make sure that
I'm
safe.
kind of curious with the Iraqi troops. Do they have an age when they can be fighting, similar to how we're set up, or are they young, older, different?
It really varies. None of them were like young. I mean, they were all like,
I just was curious.
Most of the guys were 20s or 30s. And that's, just from looking at them, I honestly didn't ask them their ages. I was just there to train them. So, but 20s or 30s were the majority of them. And, like I said, some of them really cared, and then some of them were there just to get a paycheck. And I can't say that's much different than any other military or any other job. So, but, so our mission changed again, and we were doing that transition team, and it was different. Like I said, we, instead of doing all American patrols, we're now on the ground with a bunch of Iraqis, and we were able to we actually completed the first battalion level Iraqi operation. We went in and captured a person of interest, but we set it up as the Iraqis did everything. I mean, we set up an outer cordon, the Iraqis went in. And I mean, by the time we went straight in with them, and by the time we had dismounted out our vehicles, they were already bringing the guy out of his house. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. So it was like the first brigade or battalion level Iraqi mission with the new Iraqi army at that point in time. So it was a pretty interesting thing. Now, when we got ready to leave, we talked to the unit that was coming over and taking over for us, and we explained to them, like, they really looked to us, kind of like, my soldiers looked to me for leadership. They looked to us for leadership. Like, we went out on every patrol with them. And at the time, we were doing 2 4-hour patrols a day with the unit, with the Iraqi army, and doing 4 hours of training. And then when my platoon sergeant went home on leave for R&R, I took over as the MIT team leader and as the platoon sergeant. And so then, of course, you got to do briefings every day. And when you do your combat patrols, you have to come back and do your patrol briefings and stuff like that. So, I mean, I was literally working, 20, 21 hours a day for about a 6-week period. And, it takes a toll. Let's just say I got addicted to Red Bull. So they gave us Red Bull in the dining facility, and I drank quite a bit of it. And but it was an experience. And like I said, the biggest thing for us is, especially as a leader, is just making sure that, whether you believe what you're doing is right or not, your guys believe that what you're doing is right. So you got to project that to them. There was one instance where we, with the Iraqis, took over. We went out on patrol and stage. What we would do is we would drive out and stage our vehicles that we went out in. So we would stage the Bradleys and stage the Iraqi vehicles, set up a security perimeter around them, and then the rest of us would actually go on a foot patrol through the sector. And in doing that, one time we dismounted just outside of the green zone or the international zone. And we had actually just started. We only got about 100 yards from our vehicles, and there was a huge explosion behind our vehicles. And so we ran down, and we come out, and what had happened was somebody had set up an improvised explosive device, but it was one of the projectile ones. And so it had like a copper projectile set at the beginning of it, almost like a bullet. And a contracting company had come through, a security company, and they come through and they had an up-armored SUV, and it had gotten hit by this and like shredded it. I mean, you're talking an up-armored vehicle, and it was just shredded. And my guys, we came out, and we get there, and there was other vehicles in that convoy, but they weren't. They were out just pulling security. Nobody had gone to the vehicle to see if anybody was still alive or to pull anybody out. So we get up there, and I had my medic, my RTO, and I had 2 team leaders. And my medic and my team leader ran up to the vehicle and started pulling people out of the vehicle. At the time, like, bullets were going off, and we weren't 100% sure where the bullets were coming from, where the fire was coming from. And so we set the Iraqis up. I worked to set the Iraqis up in a perimeter around the area so we could secure it. And then, my medic and my other guys were working on applying first aid to these guys. There was 5 people in the vehicle. And, we ended up responding. And I will tell you, this is one of the times that the tanks, I was kind of like saying how we had a hard time in the beginning. Like, they had a tank set up at the entrance to the green zone. And like I said, we were just outside of it when this explosion happened. And so we're setting this up, and we've got all kinds of issues. And the the terrorists like to set up a secondary device sometimes. So when you responded, they'd blow that up and injure the responders or kill the responders. So we were concerned about that. I had the Iraqi soldiers going back and forth, sweeping through to make sure there was no secondary devices. And so, you got all these insecurities, and then all of a sudden this huge M1 Abrams tank comes driving down the road and sets up at the end of the road to do an overwatch for us. And, that just kind of like gave you a sense of pride and confidence, because it's a huge tank that, comes running up there to support you guys. So, it was one of the times we were thankful that they were there with us. But, and it's something like that, we medevac those guys to the hospital. 3 out of the 5 had passed. But I was really proud of my guys, because, a lot of guys, I had one kid that was 18 years old, had been with the unit for a month before we deployed. And so, like, had just came out of basic and AIT and deployed with us, and he was actually my RTO. And so, like, I'm going around, and when you do a medevac, you have a 9-line medevac, you have to give them information. Well, I'm also trying to do security and make sure there's no secondary devices, and coordinating between us and the Iraqis and the contractors that were there. And so, like, my unit kept calling and asking for information, and I just kept, I was like, I've got my priorities here. I'll get to you in a minute. So I had my my RTO was running around with me, and this is an 18-year-old kid that was just holding the guy's brains in his head, because the guy had actually gotten hit with a piece of shrapnel and split his skull open. So he was holding this guy's head together as the medic was trying to wrap it and do what he could for him. And so I'm yelling at him because I need the radio. I'm like yelling at him to get away from there and get over here with me. So we go around and I'm setting up the security. And then so I get done setting security and I'm confident that it's good. And then so I go back and I'm like, all right, so give me the radio so that I can call and see what information they're wanting so I can get it for them. And he's like, hey, Sergeant, he's like, I've already got it. He goes, I wrote it down. And then while you were doing the security, I was talking to the guys from the convoy getting the information that they needed. And so like this 18-year-old kid, 1 minute, holding the wounded guy together, the next minute he's still gathering information. I'm friends with him on Facebook too, and he just graduated from Auburn University with a degree in physics.
Oh, so, my goodness! Yes. Wow.
Yeah, so he's a brainiac too. So I was really proud in how they responded, and how well they did with that. Several of the guys got awards for what they did there. So and
sounds like it might have been perhaps one of your most challenging situations in a leadership position.
That
Maybe there's another, but
that was definitely probably one of the hardest, and at the time. And like I said, I was really proud though of how the guys responded. Because I can say that I projected confidence and I did all this and did that, but it still comes down to them doing what needs to be done too. And I will say, it's almost like having a kid that comes home with all A's on their report card, and you're proud of them. And that's kind of how I felt with these guys. I've spent months and months with them, and in combat situations, high stress, and then to see them. Like I said, that 18-year-old kid and the stuff that he did, and my medic and how well he responded, my team leaders, and what had happened is in the vehicle, they had an M60 set up in the back of it for rear security, and when the vehicle blew up, it had caught on fire, and all the rounds in the back of the vehicle were going off. So as we were pulling people out of the vehicle, rounds were going off. We ended up having to move over behind some equipment to prevent from being shot from the vehicles being cooked off in the back of the vehicle. Matter of fact, the guy that I was talking about with his skull, he was actually shot in the back also as we were pulling him out of the vehicle.
It doesn't sound like he survived.
He did not, no. We got him to the hospital alive, but no, he did not. He was one of the 3 that did not survive. One guy did survive that surprised me because he had been third-degree burns over 70% of his body. He was actually the M60 gunner in the back of the vehicle. But he actually survived. He was one of the ones that did survive. There was only one American. The rest of them there was 3 South Americans and an Iraqi interpreter that were in the vehicle. So,
what was it like dealing with the Iraqi people? How did you find that overall?
For the most part, it wasn't. I mean, they're people. Their culture is way different than ours is. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize is their culture is just different than what we are. But as far as for the most part, there was a lot of support. Especially if you go out there and you don't go out with an attitude that you're superior to them. You go out and you actually talk to them and have conversations. We did a lot of things where we would take our medics and we would try to help people that were having issues. I remember there was one little toddler that somebody had spilt boiling water on and had burned the toddler's leg, but then they had wrapped it with gauze, and it had oozed, with infection. So it had oozed, and so it had dried. So this pus had dried on the gauze, and so our medic had to work and soften it. We were using our Camelback water to try to soften it. So we'd take it off and give them antibiotics to help help the baby. And there was another instance where a kid that was 7 years old, they had a door-to-door doctor come in and circumcise this 7-year-old, and it had gotten infected. And we went out there and, again, the medic was doing, but we would do things like that to try to reach out and touch them and get their support. And those were the feel-good moments, taking out, soccer balls, because soccer was was huge over there. So, taking out soccer balls and giving them to the kids and stuff like that. So,
but temperature-wise, hot?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I said, we drove around in the Bradleys quite a bit, and I mean, it'd get up to 120, 125 degrees regularly. And in the back of a Bradley, like I said, I'm a bigger guy, and most of the guys in my squad were bigger guys. Plus, you got all your combat equipment on, and they try to fit an entire squad in the back of a Bradley. They say they fit. I say they're not exactly right, but so you've got 9 guys in the back of this Bradley fighting vehicle that's a metal can, and if it's 125 degrees out, it's probably 140 or 145 in there, and it's not like there's any air movement. It's just 9 guys with all their equipment on, sweaty and smelling really good. But I will tell you, when something blows up outside of the Bradley, it's nice to be in it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, definitely it was very hot and dusty. I remember when I came back from R&R, my youngest daughter, I came back from R&R. I was one of the first ones from the unit to come back because nobody wanted to come back that early. Because when I came back from R&R, we got 2 weeks on the ground in the U.S., and then I had to go back. I had 7 months of my deployment left when I got back. Nobody wanted those first few trips back. Well, it worked out well for me because my youngest daughter actually turned 1 while I was at home, so I got to be there for her first birthday. Aww. So it worked out well for me. But I remember flying in and just of course flying into Georgia and how green it was, because I'm used to brown and tan and desert. And I mean, even the buildings are, tan. So, coming home and seeing all the green, it was just amazing. It was a good feeling coming home.
So when you came back, then did you have another deployment back
no,
there?
That was my only deployment. I actually came back, and I'd had some orthopedic type injuries before I went, and with the pounding I put on my body, they just got worse while I was there. And by the time I came back, I was in pain constantly. I couldn't walk right because my ankle. And I went and had a conversation with our doctor, our PA, and told him that they needed to do something or I was going to not be a happy person. And I didn't say it that nicely, though. And they went in and did an MRI. I ended up having 5 surgeries over the next 2.5 years. 2 of them on my ankle, my shoulder, and some other stuff. So that put me on a permanent profile, and it eventually ultimately led to me being medically retired. Now from Georgia, though, I re-enlisted again. I actually re-enlisted while I was in Iraq, and it was a neat experience because I was actually re-enlisted by General Schumacher, who was the Army Chief of Staff at the time. He was there visiting, and there was a group of about 30 of us that were re-enlisted, and he actually did our re-enlistment for us. So that was a neat experience. But I had been trying to get a position in the active guard reserve, the AGR, active guard reserve, so that I could spend more time at home. And I went to the re-enlistment guy and was talking to him about it, and he said he would look into it for me. And then I went back and talked to him the next day, and he told me I couldn't because I was coming down on orders. And so there was nothing I could do. And found out that I was supposed to be going on orders to become a drill instructor. And but when I got back and had my first ankle surgery, they put me on a P2, which made it so I couldn't do the drill the drill instructor position, because you can't be on a permanent profile and do that still. So I re-enlisted again and went to Alaska. It was a place, yes. I always wanted to go to Alaska. I actually got to go to a trip to Alaska when I was stationed in Hawaii and got to go hiking in Denali National Park and decided I wanted to go back there. And so when I came back and knew I couldn't do the drill instructor, I re-enlisted to go to Alaska, went to Fort Wainwright. And I went there with the idea because I have had light infantry and I had mechanized infantry. And they had the medium brigades, which are the Stryker vehicles. And so I figured I would go to Fort Wainwright and get assigned to a Stryker, and I'd have all 3 phases of the combat infantry. And ended up getting selected to go to Northern Warfare Training Center instead as an instructor, which that was a really unique experience. They were stationed at Fort Wainwright, but they had a training facility down in Black Rapids training site that where they did like all cold regions operations instruction.
Well, that's a real switch.
So
from
like
one.
yeah, so like we did glacier traversing, mountaineering, mountain rappelling, rock climbing, snowshoes, skiing.
I'm thinking images of 10th Mountain or sort of.
Well, 10th Mountain would
Yeah.
actually come up and train with it. We actually trained a lot of special operations groups and stuff, or units that were getting ready to go to Afghanistan because there's more mountains in Afghanistan. We would actually have them come up and we would train them. We also did other training for the units in Alaska just for the cold regions because, being an officer or even an NCO, you get ready to go out and you're going to do a movement. I might do a movement in Hawaii and think that it's going to take me 4 hours to do the movement. Well, if I'm going through the mountains in 3 foot of snow, that 4 hours is going to turn into a 12-hour movement. And a lot of people don't realize that when they go to do it until they experience it. And so that was kind of what we did is we trained the units on the cold regions operations and how different it was. It was a lot of fun. I ended up having a second ankle surgery at that point in time, so I trained to be an instructor and taught a couple of classes and then got moved into the office and became a kind of like a school's NCO. I coordinated with the units that were coming in to make sure all their travel and stuff was correct. And I did that for a little while before I finally ended up being medically retired. I got medically retired. Like I said, I'd had 2 ankle surgeries. The last one, they actually, got some cadaver parts and some metal plates and stuff put in my ankle. But I ended up having a second DVT, which is deep venous thrombosis, which is a blood clot. And I'd had one with my first ankle surgery. It was put on blood thinners for a year. And they told me if I ever had another one, I'd be on blood thinners for the rest of my life. And, of course, with the second ankle surgery, they actually put me on blood thinners for a couple of weeks. But then a week after I came off the blood thinners, I had another blood clot. Was hospitalized, ended up going through, had a pulmonary embolism. And at that point, I was put on blood thinners for life. And that restricts your duty stations that you can go to because you got to go to a duty station that has a good hospital close by. So because that restrict my duty stations, I ended up being medically retired out. So.
And what year are we talking about now?
2009.
2009.
My actual retirement day was May 31st, 2009.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Sometimes when we've interviewed some of the Vietnam vets, of course, they talk about that was an unpopular war and whatnot. But what was the reception like when you got back from Iraq?
It was outstanding, and it was because of the Vietnam veterans. And I've told the story. I work for the VA. I work for the National Cemetery Administration now, and I've told this story in speeches that I've given before. That I remember coming off the plane when we came back from Iraq, and on either side was lined up a bunch of Vietnam veterans to welcome us home, and they were there. Shook our hands, told us they were proud of us, thanks for our service. And then I remember going through the civilian airport, and then having people stopping and clapping for us and, thanking us. And, in all honesty, that kind of stuff makes me feel uncomfortable because I'm not, but at the same time, it makes you feel good that people care. I never had anybody that was negative towards me when I came back.
Different situation.
And I really do think a lot of that is because of the Vietnam veterans making sure that we didn't have the same reception they did. And I appreciate that and always will.
So now you're director over at the National Cemetery.
Yeah.
And I usually ask this of people that we interview. Message to young people, if you had a group of young people, about military service in general.
About military service in general.
Encourage or not, or?
I would definitely encourage it. I think military service is outstanding. Like I said, I have 2 stepchildren that are, one's in the Marine Corps, one's in the Army. I have another one that is looking at joining the Army. But know what you want to do, though. I mean, for me, infantry was what I wanted to do. I was good at it. And I say this in my speeches, in being a director at the National Cemetery, I had to go through a year of schooling where you had to introduce yourself to different classes all the time. And my spiel was the same every time, Hi, I'm Lance Pridemore, and, I was in the Army, I was medically retired. I was in the infantry. I liked it. I love it, and I miss it every day, and I still miss it every day. I still have a lot of my friends, a lot of my my guys that we were on the same level, my peer group, that are first sergeants and sergeant majors now, and I talk to them all the time, and I do. I miss it. If they told me I could go back in tomorrow, my wife knows I would. So, but I definitely think that if you're going to do it, make sure you know what you want out of it. For me, infantry is what I wanted, but for somebody else, maybe there's a lot of different jobs in the military. Figure out what you want to do, and then understand too that if you do decide to make it a career, if you don't like the job that you're in, when you re-enlist, you can change too. Don't let somebody tell you you can't, because you can. You just got to be able to stand up for yourself at that point. But and it's not for everybody, but I do think that it's an experience that everybody should try. but make sure you know what get out. You're going to get out of it what you put into it. I was a fast tracker. I made E7 in 8 years. The average Army is 12 to 14 years.
Sure.
And but like I said, it's what you make out of it. I remember guys that hated being in Hawaii, and that's because those are the same guys that sat in their barracks room complaining about there was nothing to do, instead of being out and hiking or learning scuba diving and stuff. Take advantage of the area that you're in. That would be my biggest thing. Do what you want to do in the military, and then get out and enjoy where you're at and what you're doing.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this. Thank you, Lance.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you to our viewers out there. Again, you can see these interviews on Culpeper Media Network, War Veterans, History of Our Heroes. Thank you for joining us. Look forward to more.